Time now for Football at 4. It is brought to you by the New Jersey Lottery. Anything can happen in Jersey, and New Jersey Lottery encourages everyone to dream big. However, the lottery should not be played as an alternative source of income, and you should always know your limits. Dream big, play responsibly. The New Jersey Lottery. So, the NFL decided we're not going anywhere. And they not only didn't go anywhere, they jumped onto the forefront with moves happening on legal tampering. We got trades, we got rumors, we got innuendo, we got all sorts of stuff. We got Football at 4 to break it all down. John McMullen at JF McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, Sports Illustrated, and of course, here on the Sports Bash, Football at 4. Johnny Mac, what's going on?
Hey, Mike, how are you? We got stuff to talk about.
You and I have tons of stuff. We might fill the whole hour here with what's going on.
We could go for 4. We could go for 10 hours, I think.
I said before the show, people kept asking me, what are you going to talk about? I said I might need 6 to 8 hours to fill today's show. There's so much happening. It started over the weekend with the CBA being extended. I know you tweeted closer than you thought. And how much did this coronavirus and everything that's happened in the world contribute to that CBA getting passed or the way that we now know it?
Yeah, I don't know how much it did. I think if it had an effect, it would have been opposite. It would have made it not close. I think it was too late in the process. I think at the very end, players were concerned it wasn't going to pass because the realization kind of set in that, oh my, if this thing doesn't pass with the economy bottoming out, potential, things could get really ugly. So I think it was from more that perspective. Anybody who's listened to this show knows from day one I said it would pass. And if you paid attention only to social media, I said you thought it wouldn't pass. I think a lot of people paid attention to social media, and they listened to the high-profile players, Aaron Rodgers, J.J. Watt, Russell Wilson, players like that. I think there's a lot of guys that listened to him and voted no.
Well, and how lucky, there was a lot of players that did not vote at all.
Yeah, I mean, there were about 500 of guys who are in the union. But, I mean, if you compare that to a typical election, that's a pretty good turnout. Mm-hmm. So I think the vast majority of guys, about 2,000, just round numbers, 2,000 out of 2,500, voted. That's big for any election. So I don't pay much attention to that. Everyone says anyone should vote, but we all know that just doesn't happen. So a lot of guys got out and gave their opinion, and that's how it should be.
All right. Well, that was the big news over the weekend that the NFL, the CBA was passed, and the big part of it is there's going to be a 17th game. That will probably start in 2021. But was that the biggest CBA news for you? Because obviously the common fan is not paying attention to the little intricacies that might affect these players, that why they didn't want to do this either way. But the 17th game had to be one of the bigger reasons why they might have been a holdup.
Yeah, it's tough to tell. I mean, to me, and I always say the biggest issue was always the revenue split. And that was acceptable. There's no question how things went, and the narrative, the online narrative, was a lot of that was focused on 17 games and the safety issue. You and I have talked in the past about how the lessening of marijuana penalties would tip things in a different way. I think that's important for a certain constituency. But look, it's always about money, and that's usually what it comes down to. And all the other stuff, I say it all the time, it's white noise.
Yep, some reminders real quick. The CBA will mean that there's expanded playoffs. This year, we're going to have extra teams in the playoffs, but the 17-game regular season, that won't begin until at least next year. And so those were some of the things. And then, obviously, you got that. You had the players voting to approve the proposed CBA 10 more years of labor peace now. And so that's great. I mean, we don't have to worry about lockouts or any of that stuff. I'll probably be done on the show from 10 years from now, so I won't have to talk about another labor agreement with you. But what was next is that they decided not to push back the league year or the opening of the season, which apparently was met with some mixed reviews. And according to some, now, DeMaurice Smith this morning said it was not the players, and he said he has an idea who he thinks leaked that out. But I know a lot of people think it was coming from the NFLPA, that they did not want to push the league year back and that the league wanted to.
Yeah, it's interesting. These two, they just came to an agreement, as you mentioned, for more than a decade of labor peace, because it's an extension. So you have this year and 10 more after it. So it's 11 years total. So they got nothing to argue about technically, at least for a few years. And we didn't get to a few minutes. They're blaming each other. Because I mentioned last week on the show, they were going to receive criticism if they didn't push the new league year back. From what I was told, that same thing. The owners wanted to push it back. You have to collectively bargain that because the players are involved as well, and the players did not want to push it back. So that was the story reporters were being told, and then D. Smith, as you mentioned, came out and said it wasn't us. So it's interesting, each side doesn't want to be responsible because, as I mentioned, you're going to have these, whatever you want to call them, high-minded people on their soapbox saying you shouldn't be doing this. And I mentioned that was going to happen on the show last week. It has happened, and nobody wants to take the brunt of saying business as usual. So it's tough to point fingers other than I talked to an agent. He said, look, this kind of stuff has real-world effect on the players because a lot of the contract language is you get roster bonuses, whatever bonuses, on, say, the third day of the new league year or the fifth day of the new league year, or it has to be guaranteed the first day of the new league year. That's where the Eagles are with Malcolm Jenkins. If you push back the start of the new league year, that means those guys aren't getting their money until months down the line. So it's just one of those things that the average person doesn't think about, and it's real, and it has an impact on people, and they want their money when they're supposed to get their money.
John, what does the new CBA that just went in mean for Alshon Jeffrey's future with Philadelphia? Is this anything change? Is this a positive development or status quo?
No, it's positive development for the Eagles. It makes it easier for them to cut him. It was not going to be tenable to just release him if the CBA wasn't extended because there are certain rules in the final year of the CBA that wouldn't have been in play. One of them is the post-June 1st designation. And what that enables you to do is take that dead money, which is $26 million, and spread it over 2 years. If there wasn't a new CBA, all of that $26 million would have been accelerated onto this year's cap. So, as I always explain, either way, it's some distasteful medicine the Eagles have to take if they want to cut Alshon Jeffrey. But they can split it up now over 2 years if they want to move on. The best case scenario is still a trade, and it would be an NBA-like salary dump, essentially, where you send along a draft pick along with Alshon Jeffrey to a team that has a lot of cap space and is willing to ingest that contract. That's what the Eagles probably hope to do, but I'm not sure they'll be able to get it done.
Okay, and then there's the Malcolm Jenkins question, where, as you wrote about at 973ESPN.com, he's staring down the barrel of a deadline here, and he has made it clear he will not play under this deal. So what happens, and where does this all stand now that we're basically at that deadline?
Yeah, March 18th, the Eagles have to either pick up their team option on Malcolm, and as you mentioned, he said he's not playing under that team option. Work out a new deal to make him happy, or cut him and let him test free agency. And it's going to be interesting because the Eagles have so many pieces in play when it comes to the secondary. Essentially, all four starters, Jalen Mills, Ronald Darby at corner, Malcolm Jenkins, Rodney McLeod at safety, there's uncertainty surrounding. Three of them are free agents already. The one who isn't, Malcolm, has said he's not going to play under this team option. So that's a lot of moving parts. You don't want to go into any season with four new defensive backs, even though obviously I understand people say the secondary wasn't good. It wasn't good, but that's a lot of change, and you just don't see that in the NFL. So to go into another season, say, have two new safeties, two new cornerbacks, I don't know if that's the way you want to go. So the Eagles got to figure something out. And that's why I've always thought that they'll work something out with Malcolm Jenkins. They'll try to bring back Jalen Mills and then bring in other players around them. That would be my best guess. It continues to be my best guess.
All right, John McMullen, Football at 4. Some other Eagles news today. They will not tender Cory Clemente, so that means that his stay in Philadelphia is going to come to an end. Does this, just because they're not tendering him, does that mean that they might look for another running back on the free agent market, or is it more possible that they go the same route with Clemente, an undrafted rookie or a late-round running back?
Well, you can find running backs anywhere in this league unless you're Bill O'Brien, evidently. Yeah, we talk about it all the time, that devaluation of the position. Cory Clemente's a perfect example. He's an undrafted rookie. He turns into a Super Bowl hero during his rookie season. One of the few running backs to have 100 receiving yards in a Super Bowl. It was a great story. And as you mentioned, you fast forward 2 years and he's not even getting tendered a contract. Now, in theory, that makes him an unrestricted free agent, so the Eagles could bring him back at a lesser price. And we all know the Eagles like the running back by committee. It's pretty clear that Doug Peterson is going to use a running back by committee. Miles Sanders is going to be the lead back. Boston Scott's going to be a part of that. But, yeah, you need another back to be in that mix, and you can get that in a number of different ways. Jordan Howard's still in play. The draft is in play, and, yeah, even undrafted guys.
Crazy to see that entire Philly special play is now gone. They are all parts of other organizations. More on one of those guys coming up in just a minute. But before we get there, defensive tackle Hasan Ridgeway is back with the Eagles. He just signed a one-year deal today. And, you know, that defensive tackle spot, I find there's some interesting connections in free agency that could be coming up there. But Ridgeway's coming back.
Yeah, I mean, the Eagles don't have – remember, people kind of forget about Malik Jackson, who got hurt in week 1 last year, obviously. And that was a difficult injury for this team. But he's going to be back, and he makes a ton of money. And you have Fletcher Cox, who also makes a gargantuan amount of money and should as an all-pro level player. So you can't add significant assets at that particular position. And you have to look for value as a backup, and I think the Eagles see that in Hasan Ridgeway. So in a lot of ways, that signing made a lot of sense.
It's interesting. I'm interested to see if you mentioned Malik Jackson. You're right. People do forget about him. I'm interested to see if defensive tackle is an area that they do look to add, because it feels like that position is one that they value a lot. And they went out and got Jernigan the 1 year. They got Jackson, so we'll see if they try to get creative and try to find another guy to play next to Fletcher Cox. Is that a spot that you think, there's so many trades going on in the league right now. I mean, I'm interested how Howie Roseman's not involved with any of this stuff going on. So let's get to the other guy, who is Nick Foles, because Ed Werder reporting today, Bears are focused on acquiring Andy Dalton or Nick Foles to kind of push Mitch Trubisky. So it seems that the walls are closing in on Trubisky in Chicago.
Yeah, it was even worse earlier in the day because there was a separate report from a local Chicago guy that they were looking to sign Teddy Bridgewater, which would have put Trubisky on the bench immediately. And then it shifted to Foles or Dalton. Ultimately, I thought that would be the way Chicago would go simply because, and we've mentioned this a lot, it's tough to admit a mistake in this league when you trade up and give up everything Chicago did to get Mitchell Trubisky. And, oh, by the way, passed on Deshaun Watson, Patrick Mahomes while doing it. So it's tough for Ryan Pace to say, wow, this guy stinks. We can't move forward with him as the quarterback. So I always thought they were going to go the Tennessee route and bring in a guy with some starting experience. And then, say, a month into a season like Tennessee did with Marcus Mariota, they're going to bench him and go to the different quarterback. Problem is, neither of those guys, Andy Dalton, Nick Foles, has the upside of a Ryan Tannehill. So I don't think it's going to work out the same way.
Well, we've been talking about defensive tackle, defensive line. The Colts have made a trade acquiring DeForest Buckner from the 49ers. This one, though, John, is an exchange for the 13th overall pick in the draft. That's big news.
Yeah, that's a good player. And it kind of tells you San Francisco is so deep on the defensive line. And that's what happens. I mean, they were bad for so long. They kept drafting in the top 5, top 10 of every draft. And for a while there, they kept drafting defensive linemen. They had so many first-round picks on that defensive line. And last year, it kind of all came together. But when everybody's good, then you get into this mix where you can't pay everybody. And that's the difficulty of it all. And that's why you have such short windows in this league. So that's a really good player, but that's really good value in return. And that's kind of what you have to do.
The big trade that everybody's kind of got an opinion on, Bill O'Brien, the GM, didn't sit down Bill O'Brien, the coach, and say, hey, let's figure out how to work out the issues you might have with DeAndre Hopkins. And he ends up trading him for David Johnson, who I know Johnson is a very talented guy, but, John, he hasn't had a serviceable year since 2016. What is the thought process here?
I don't know, other than he doesn't get along with DeAndre Hopkins. And you know, this is another example of people ask me what are the strengths of Doug Peterson as a head coach, and they always expect me to talk about his offensive acumen or X's and O's, and I never do. I talk about his ability to handle personalities and manage those personalities and get along with people. The old Jeffrey Lurie emotional intelligence tagline that we all joked about, but it turned out to be true. Bill O'Brien is a perfect example of a guy who doesn't have that. And you have arguably the best receiver in football, and he can't get along with him. And he's trading him for a running back, and we've just talked about the devaluation of the position. Both of those players essentially have the same cap number, and one is so impactful, and the other, as you mentioned, hasn't done anything really in years. It's just a bad decision on so many levels. And Josh asked me before I got on the air, who's first, Chip Kelly or Bill O'Brien as a coach / GM? I said, well, Bill's probably a better coach, but he's probably a worse GM, if anything, than Chip Kelly. I mean, you're talking about a guy who traded, think about this. He traded Jadeveon Clowney and now DeAndre Hopkins. He didn't get a first-round pick.
No, you're right.
It's astonishing.
All right, let's get into this. Because of that trade, it looks like Stefon Diggs feels left out. He posted on social media that it's time for a new beginning and that something's going to happen. Now, we talked about this about a month ago. It seemed to get swept under the rugs, but is Stefon Diggs wearing a new uniform in 2020?
Yeah, I think he is.
It was a good sign.
But yeah, because he's a weirdo. He does this every couple months. He goes on social media and he posts these things. And he does, he's the classic wide receiver diva. And I know everybody in Philadelphia have already got the questions, and they're excited. Let's get Stefon Diggs. Let's get Odell Beckham Jr. And I have to remind them, look at the reason why the Eagles are in the problems they are with Alshon Jeffrey. It's because of his personality. And by the way, Alshon Jeffrey is not nearly the personality of Odell Beckham or Stefon Diggs. Now, those guys are better players. They're more talented, understandable. But you don't think there's going to be issues with those guys if they get here? I don't know if I want to go down that route. You have to wait. Nobody's questioning the ability. Nobody's questioning the talent. But this is a consistent thing with this guy. He does it time and time again. Last year, he didn't show up for work for 2 days because he was upset he didn't get the ball enough.
Unbelievable.
People have to think about this.
Yeah.
And it's not, I just mentioned personalities and managing personalities. It's not a video game. It's not fantasy football. People got to get along in the locker room.
Well,
one of the strengths of the Eagles has been the culture. I don't know if you want to bring those guys into this culture.
Yeah. Real quick, a couple others. I mean, we're getting short on time. We have so many other things to get into here. Bridgewater, you mentioned the Bears. I've heard Tampa as a possibility if they can't get Tom Brady.
We've talked about, if you remember during the Combine, I told you when Don Yee, Tom Brady's agent, showed up. And that's where everything started with Tennessee. And that's where everything started with San Francisco. And it turns out that was bull bleep, all of it. It was just agent-driven, trying to create a market which doesn't exist because of what I've said time and time again. He's going to be 43 years old.
Hey, I hit a 3 in the basketball game last night. I'm 43. I can still play, baby.
Well, there you have it. I don't know if you can play against NBA players, though. And that's the difference. And by the way, no offense to you, I'm sure you have a heck of a jumper, but, Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback that ever lived. But again, all that history and all that goodwill was built up in the bank in New England, not anywhere else. It doesn't come with them to Tampa. You don't bring along the 6 Lombardi trophies when you go to a new situation. And then why would Tom want to be there? Is that team ready to win? Is he a fit with Bruce Arians? I would say no. I would say no. Only 2 places that make sense are New England and Los Angeles with the Chargers. And as I said, the Chargers have nothing to do with football.
All right. Last thing, I guess. I mean, there is a lot of other stuff out there that we're just not going to be able to get into today, which is the draft. The NFL has decided the draft is on, and they're going to try to get creative. So is this a prudent decision to do this draft, or should they push it back, or are they going to do it on social media? Are they going to do it I don't understand. I don't know what else they could do, or I know how the optics look bad that they're still doing their stuff while everybody else is on lockdown, but you could do all these things remotely.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what they're going to do. It's going to be a TV vehicle, and they're just going to have the picks, and I imagine everybody's going to talk about them. Sort of like when the draft first started, it didn't turn into what it turned into. Just a bunch of guys sitting at the table talking about each pick, running the film, and doing it that way. I don't know how else you can do that much. And they're in a bad situation like everybody else. But as you mentioned, it is all done, the ability to do it remotely. You don't need fans there. And that was going to be the question. Do you value the fans enough being there to hold off? Well, even if the NFL did, there's such uncertainty, and the president just spoke today. We could be talking about July, August, before things simmer down in a meaningful way. You can't push it back that far. So you almost have to go through with it, and that's what the NFL is going to do.
All right, it's football at 4. We'll have plenty more. By the way, free agency hasn't really actually started yet, so we just got a bunch of trades happening. We will have signings. We did have some signings today, smaller ones that we didn't get a chance to get to. I say smaller ones. Eric Flowers got 3 years, $30 million. What does that mean for Big V? I can't even wait to see what he inks for.
Well, it only takes one, I always say. And generally when you get to free agency, you're going to get overpaid. And, yeah, Eric Flowers will be the poster child of that. But, Vaitai, I do think, is going to get a nice deal. I don't know if he's going to get $10 million a year. I've heard Cleveland mentioned with him, but they're going to look at Trent Williams, try to make that deal. Might even look at Jason Peters. And then if they can't get something done with a higher name, they'll probably default to Vaitai. But he'll be interesting. I think him and Jalen Mills, those two markets for those two players are the most interesting from an Eagles perspective.
Definitely. I wanted to get it more into the Mills stuff. I guess we'll have to wait till tomorrow. At JF McMullen, football at 4, 97.3 ESPN.com. And Sports Illustrated as well. So we will do it again tomorrow. Thanks, pal.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, man. John McMullen, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.